Good morning. Well, that's a great response. How many of you remember this? About 3 years ago in 2011, IBM put their supercomputer Watson up against the two all-time champions of Jeopardy. And as you can see, Watson did pretty well. And the computer it took to do that, the machine it took to do that, filled up something the size of about like a master bedroom. It was a huge, huge computer to do that. Now today, that same computing power can fit in something like a machine about the size of 3 pizza boxes 3 years later. And earlier this year, IBM dedicated $1 billion to their Watson division. So they're tackling all kinds of things like healthcare, trying to diagnose diseases, customer service. They even have Watson now designing recipes that humans would never ever think of. These crazy combinations are actually really delicious. So recently, a few months ago, they created an app challenge to have developers figure out how to use Watson from your phone using an app. So they had hundreds of submissions for people trying to connect Watson's power with your smartphone. So what becomes possible when you have that much power available from your smartphone? Now, of course, as a futurist, that's what I'm thinking about all the time, these kind of questions. Well, first of all, who knows what a futurist is? Who's heard of a futurist before? Wow, about half of you, okay. Just to clarify, I don't think I'm a psychic or a fortune teller. People always say, oh, what's going to happen in 5 years? You know, I can't tell you stock quotes or anything like that. But what I do is I research emerging trends in technology, and then I think about these and work with futurists around the world, and we develop strategies and help businesses and organizations see what they might not be seeing. And when you're so busy with your day-to-day lives, you're so caught up in your careers and doing all the things you have to do, all your responsibilities, it's often really easy to miss really important things that are happening. So it's important to have people who just spend all their time thinking about the future to come in and help you see what you're not seeing. But as you can see, it can be really difficult to think about the future and think what's going to happen. These people should have known better. I love this quote here by the former co-CEO of BlackBerry. The iPhone's impact on our business will be minimal. Okay, just a quick survey. How many iPhones in the room? How many BlackBerries? Now, if you're embarrassed, don't raise your hand. It's fine. How many BlackBerries? Not very minimal. In fact, the iPhone just came out with the iPhone, or Apple just came out with the iPhone 6, and they had over 10 million sales in the first week. You might not have known that the BlackBerry company also came out with their new device, the Passport, which had about 200,000. So it's not very minimal. But one of the reasons it's so difficult to think about the future, one other example too, with the newspaper industry, you can see these things happen very quickly. So it's not always like we have this huge lead time, and that time is shrinking. So with the newspaper industry, they actually had one of their best years ever for revenue in 2005, for print revenue. By 2007, it fell off a cliff. So these things happen very quickly, which makes it very difficult. And another thing that makes it difficult is the idea of linear versus exponential growth, and also super exponential growth. Because our minds naturally think linearly. So when we think about the future, we naturally think these slow progressions, things will happen, just a little bit by little bit. But for decades, all these different technologies have been advancing exponentially. So they're doubling and doubling and doubling. So this isn't happening in every single technology, but it's happening enough to have a major impact in our lives. I'll give you a couple examples of some exponential doublings here. In less than 10 years, you had a 1,000% increase in how much memory those little SD cards can hold, something you put in your phone or in your camera. 128 megabytes to 128 gigabytes. That enables so many other technologies. If the SD card was advancing linearly, like we'd probably project if you were to ask somebody in 2005, your smartphone probably wouldn't even hold an entire CD worth of music. But now, you can have tens or hundreds of hours of HD video and all kinds of things, just because it's exponential advancement. I'll give you another example here. Self-driving cars. 10 years ago, if you asked someone about self-driving cars, unless they were a futurist, they would say you're crazy. Yeah, it's 50 years away. It's not 50 years away. This is Audi's Audi Connect vehicle at the CES, Consumer Electronics Show this year. This self-driving car, in 2013, it took the entire trunk filled with electronics to drive itself around. And just being able to drive itself already is very amazing. 2014, 1 year later, all those electronics can fit in where the CD player used to be in the trunk. So it's like the size of smaller than a laptop in 1 year. And they just got a license to drive on California roads, anywhere in California roads. And Google's driven 700,000 miles of self-driving cars. So most manufacturers actually say they will have a consumer price model available by 2020. because it's exponential growth. So it's very important to think exponentially as we're projecting out. Now let me give you another example, and I want you to see if you can spot the difference. I've got two pictures here, and if you spot the difference, raise your hand. In 2005, a new pope was announced over St. Peter's Square. The same thing happened again last year in 2013. And I've got the pictures from both events, and as soon as you spot the difference, let me know. All right, who can spot the difference? What a difference 8 years makes. Who can spot the futurist? Here's a bonus question for you. I think that's the arm of a futurist right there. We've got one person who's like, hey, I could record this. Now, we've actually shipped more than 1 billion smartphones just last year in 1 year, so you can see how quickly this is changing. That's why it went from that to that in 8 years. What does it look like in 2021 and 8 years from then? What's that scene going to look like then if they announce another pope in St. Peter's Square? Yeah, smartwatches. So the world is changing really quickly, but something that's really important to remember as we're thinking about these changes is the concept of unlearning. I'll give you a quote here from the author, Alvin Toffler, the futurist author. So we have to make way for this new information. If we're kind of stuck in our old traditions and the old way of doing things and thinking linearly, it's not going to allow us to accept this new information and things that are happening. Now, my goal today, I'm not coming up here, like I said, I'm not a psychic or something. I'm not up here to say, this is going to happen on this day and you have to do this tomorrow or something. My goal today is really just to be a catalyst for discussion. I want to get you guys talking about this, which you already are in many respects. I think you guys are very ahead of the curve here with your Future Forward College and with Butch and Benita and other Future Forward faculty. But I really want you to kind of look at these different trends and see how it could impact education and realize it's not a 5-year timescale or a 10-year timescale. These things are happening very quickly to be aware of. And to do that, I'm going to go over some important trends that I've identified, generational trends and the impact of digital natives, workforce trends, which certainly impact education, trends specifically in education technology. We'll talk a little bit about e-learning and online learning and what's happening there. And I'm also going to go over some emerging trends that you might not have heard of that aren't directly impacting education yet, but they have the potential to hugely impact education, things to kind of keep on your radar. But before we move on to the future of education, let's kind of talk about the current state and what's driving some of these changes. So have you ever stopped to think, why is education the way that it is? Why do we have everyone in the same class, learning the same thing at the same time, relatively at the same pace? We have our years divided into semesters. You have course information kind of arbitrarily divided into specific individual courses where it might not naturally go together or should be connected to something else. We're actually on a 19th century Prussian model. That's what a lot of American education is based on. So it's this really old Prussian model. And that's actually created to create uniform industrial age workers. We're going to have everyone kind of getting the same thing and coming out the same at the other end, which is clearly not what we need in today's society. That's like the last thing we need is uniform industrial age workers. We also have a really narrow focus and narrow idea of what education is. Have you ever done something that was really difficult and thought, why doesn't this count for something? Like, I'll give you a great example of that. When a couple weeks ago, my wife and I went camping for a week for her birthday in the middle of September. We were camping for an entire week, so that's a logistical nightmare. Like trying to figure out all of the wood you need to burn and how much ice to put in the cooler, mapping out the meals, packing our kayak and our bikes and trying to get all that, to get the tent set up. I'm thinking, why can't I put this on my resume? This is crazy. But we have such a narrow focus of what education is. One of the worst things about our current model is not being focused on mastery learning. So from K through 12 and into college, in most courses, a 70% is passing. How is a 70% passing? You're missing almost a third of the information. So when you think about it, if you had a really rough week in 6th grade, say you had the flu or something, you could actually change the trajectory of your entire career because you might have missed a key concept that built on other things, and the next classes you can't do. And so you look at kids, all say they hate math when they get older, or students, by the time they get to college, most of them hate math. If you ask like a 6-year-old, they love math. Because if you miss a couple key concepts, it gets really difficult down the road. And that's why you have so many people coming in and having remedial courses because they might have just missed a concept. So this lack of mastery learning is one of the worst things happening, I think, right now in higher education and also on K through 12. Now, a great thing to look at, a great resource here is Sal Khan's book. The guy founded Khan Academy. You guys familiar with Khan Academy? He wrote a book called The One World Schoolhouse back in 2012. This is a phenomenal explanation of why we're currently structured the way we are. I highly recommend reading this book. When you think about it, since the end of World War II, we've had almost nonstop growth in the number of students. So, around at World War II, at the end of World War II, like 5% of people went to college. It's been going up pretty much every year since then. So this has kind of led to a business model in a lot of institutes of higher education that's based on this never-ending growth. The problem is in the future, that is not sustainable. We are not going to have never-ending growth forever in education. But many colleges and universities are acting like they're completely immune to all these exponential forces that are disrupting every other industry. They're just planning on growing forever. That's why you still have a 5-year procurement process to get a new class in a lot of cases. By the time the class finally gets approved, it might not be viable anymore. And that's just part of this basic structure been going on for so long. So you have tuition costs rising. You've heard that in the news a million times. Tuition keeps going up. Student loans keep going up and up and up. But unfortunately, all that money is not being put directly into enhancing education. We're doing things like building, let me pause real quick and let you take a look at this, this quote about the old model here. This is indicative of what's happening with our current structure. It's that we're adapted to an environment that no longer exists. So we're doing things like building lavish student housing. I live in Tallahassee. I would literally say this is on the middle to lower end of student housing off campus. It is incredible. As a futurist, it is difficult living there. Hundreds of new units are going up continuously, non-stop building, because they have FSU and TCC and all these schools there, FAMU. People think that it's just going to keep growing forever. So you have all this money, all this student loan that's going to these luxury houses, you have luxury facilities at the universities, just putting money in a lot of the wrong things. So we're clearly on an unsustainable path in education, which is really driving a lot of these changes. But I'm not here as a futurist, just saying this is all doom and gloom, we're all going to die, everything's going to close tomorrow or something. There are tremendous opportunities for organizations that actually look to the future and start being aware of these trends to get in front of them instead of just trying to fight to keep things the same. And I think with community colleges, you actually have a much better opportunity because you can be a lot more dynamic and you can change a lot faster. You're not like some of these four-year institutions who are so stuck in their ways, I think that it's not going to go well for them in the future because they are just refusing to change. With community colleges, you're able to transfer and be more dynamic and change faster. Now, a good way to approach thinking about all these changes is the method that Daniel Burrus uses. He's one of my favorite futurists. His name is a guy named Daniel Burrus. He has a hard trends versus soft trends method. So he says when you're thinking about the future, there's so many uncertainties. If you identify the hard trends, the things that are definitely happening, it helps you identify the soft trends, things that might happen because of that. So I've identified some hard trends in education to kind of frame our thinking here. I'll show you what those are here. Technology will continue advancing. Generational trends will affect education. The old model is certainly not the most effective to train tomorrow's workforce. Prices at some point must stop rising. I mean, we can't get to $1 million a year at a college or something. Online education will continue to improve. We're increasingly shifting to mobile devices, especially with digital natives and some of the younger generations. And lifelong learning is now necessary. Do those seem pretty fair? Do those seem like good, hard trends we can start on? Yes, I'm going to make this available so you can have it. So one of the trends I'm going to start with here to look at these possibilities is generational trends and the impact of digital natives. Are you guys all familiar with the term digital natives? Okay. Yeah, these are digital natives right here. So pretty much, just to kind of give you a quick recap, and I see quite a few digital natives in the room here, but basically anyone born after like 81, 82, kind of somewhere in that area. This includes Generation Y, which are millennials, Generation Z, pretty much anyone after that. So those are the digital natives. And they're a very diverse group, and I'll kind of make some assumptions here, but they have a lot of similarities that are very important to how we think about what's happening in education. So, of course, it doesn't apply to every single individual, but there are a lot of similarities here. And one of the main things is they were born digital. They've known digital their whole lives. So they've had a cell phone, tablet. They've had access to all the world's information, essentially, since they can remember. And rapid change is the norm for them. They're not afraid of new technology. But if you look around the room today, so everybody look around the room, some of us are digital immigrants. We are not digital natives. And I think I have a unique perspective because I was born in '79, so I'm 35 years old. I'm either a really young digital immigrant or a really old digital native. So I think it kind of gives me a perspective. I have kind of a foot in both worlds, so I can kind of see both sides of the story here. But I'll give you an example of the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants. Let's say you're a digital immigrant. You get to work on Monday, and you have all new software on your computer. Everything's completely different. You can barely turn it on. So you're looking at it and you're saying, oh no, look at all this new software I have to learn. I'm so busy, I can't do this. If you're a digital native, you're thinking, cool, look what this new software can do. That's a really fundamentally different way of looking at the world. Because if you're a digital native, technology gives you options, not obligations. So with digital natives, they're not going to get news from a newspaper. You don't see a lot of 19-year-olds reading a newspaper. And even having to talk on the phone actually makes a digital native nervous. If you get like a Generation Z especially, they are like really scared of having to actually call somebody. And even less than calling people, they like email much less than that. They hate email. How many of you got emails from a student at one point that you said, how did you possibly hit send when you wrote this? I mean, they don't like email. So they're using new apps instead of Facebook, like Telegram and WhatsApp. And so you have on Facebook, if you're a digital native, you have your parents setting up accounts just to spy on you. You have your grandparents on there saying, good job, sweetie, I can't believe, you're my, whatever. It's just totally embarrassing you, so you're kind of shifting to these new different apps. And then they're binge watching Netflix and YouTube, and they're Snapchatting at the same time. They have 4 screens going at the same time. In fact, did you know that digital natives, I just saw a survey on this, they have a much higher identification of YouTube stars than Hollywood stars. They know more people on YouTube than they know the Hollywood actors. And they have this really ubiquitous, with ubiquitous mobile devices, they have this really mobile-oriented view of the internet. They experience the internet through mobile devices. In fact, in a recent survey, 87% of millennials said their phone never leaves their side. Ever. And this is becoming true, for older generations as well, but it's starting there. Now, digital natives already outnumber baby boomers as of today. So it's really important to start understanding this millennial mindset and kind of how does this impact, the way they look at the world impact education? So first of all, you have to consider the economy that digital natives have experienced growing up here. The traditional American dream that many of us digital immigrants have been taught has never and will never exist for a digital native. So think about what that means. Because they've lived through the Great Recession, they've lived through the housing crisis, they've had maybe their parents lose their house, or their mom who did exactly what she's supposed to do, went to college, got a job, worked really hard, working for a pension, and then she gets laid off. So they don't believe in this American dream. It doesn't exist for them. They have no expectations of a lifelong career. They certainly don't think they're going to have a pension at any time. They're questioning going to college, or questioning buying a house, buying a car. Just student loan debt alone last year accounted for over 400,000 houses not being purchased in the US. That's 8% of the market just from student loan debt. That's a pretty significant impact. And I just read just over half of 16 to 19-year-olds have a driver's license. 16 to 19-year-olds. When I turned 16, I got a driver's license the day I turned 16. And almost all my friends did too. Now you ask a 19-year-old, there's like a 50-50 chance they have a driver's license. These trends are huge and they're happening right now. So this has really affected their values. I think above all, digital natives value flexibility, being able to do what they want to do on their own time and things that they think are worthwhile. They're very value conscious. They're moving away from brand identification. One of the most popular teen brands is Abercrombie & Fitch. They just announced they're taking all their large logos off their clothes going forward. Because the digital natives don't want to wear all these logos and they have a different identification of what's value. Now, digital natives are very socially conscious, but they are not likely at all to get into politics. They think the government is so broken and inefficient, they don't want anything to do with it. That's what they think about bureaucracy. I totally agree, but maybe that's the digital native part of me that agrees with that. And if you tell a digital native, well, that's how it's always been done. That's why we do it that way. That is not an answer for them. You can't just say that's because that's how it's always been done. They want real-time feedback. They'd rather understand right away. They'd rather understand right away how well they're doing, either if they're not doing well or not. They want this constant real-time feedback. So The economy and then the ideas and views of digital natives has created this movement called collaborative consumption. Are you guys familiar with that term, or sharing economy? So digital natives don't see the value in owning something as long as they have access to it. That's what this collaborative consumption is coming from. So why have to buy something as long as you can get it whenever you want? It's access over ownership mentality, and that's really driving a lot of these changes here. But you know, that's kind of understandable because you think they have access to everything in the cloud now. You have streaming music, so you can get music anytime. Google Music, I have this. I pay $8 a month for Google Music. I can listen to any song I want as long as I want, anytime, unlimited to any of my devices for $8 a month. Why would I ever buy a bunch of CDs or even MP3s when I can just listen to whatever I want all the time? Same thing with like, why buy a Blu-ray where you can just go to Netflix or Amazon or anything and just watch a movie online? Everything's just available, but you don't have to own it. And we're seeing a huge increase in sharing services as well. Digital natives, it seems like if they don't like the traditional way of doing something or not having access to something, they just create a way to do it. So you have companies like Lyft and Uber and Car2Go and Zipcar. Uber's having tremendous effect in the world right now. It's incredible. You know, it's just basically going around the taxi industry. If you need a ride, you look at your phone, you click on I want a ride, say where you're going. You can see all the cars that are available on your little map on your phone. As soon as someone accepts your ride, you see how many minutes it is as you can see their vehicle actually driving to you. And you can see their picture and their license plate number, what kind of car they have. And then they pick you up, and as soon as you get dropped off, you just get out and walk away. It's already automatically paid for, no tipping. You're not scrambling looking for cash or for your credit card. Just get in, get out. Then we have Airbnb. So with Airbnb, you can rent out anything from literally a couch to a castle. If you have an extra room or something, you can just rent it out on Airbnb. I'll give you a personal example with Airbnb. A couple of years ago, I wanted to go to Delray Beach. I live in Tallahassee. I wanted to go to Delray Beach for my birthday. And I was looking at hotels down there. It was like $250 a night for like a small hotel room. I'm like, I'm not paying $250 a night to stay in Delray Beach. I went to Airbnb. I got a fully furnished townhouse, 2 bedrooms, balcony, big pool, on the main strip, right by the beach for $100 a night. Because some guy in New York had an extra vacation property he was only at 2 weeks a year, and the rest of the time, it's just making him money. So Airbnb is already in 192 countries in 34,000 cities, and as of 2012, 2 years ago, they had already booked more rooms than all of the Hilton properties combined. So this collaborative consumption is a very real trend to pay attention to. So this is not good for our traditional consumer society. In fact, in San Francisco, the taxi industry is revolting because in 2 years, their revenue has dropped 65% in 2 years. They're on the verge, most of the major taxi companies are on the verge of bankruptcy in San Francisco. So you have, just like anywhere else, these traditional industries are fighting to keep things the same, even though it's a losing battle, but they just keep fighting. They have the lobbying groups and everyone fighting to keep it the same. And then Uber just announced that they're letting their API or their software, their system, to be available to any developers so they can create their own things for Uber. So like Uber for deliveries, Uber for picking up your groceries, Uber for just using the system to use in any other industry. So it's going to start changing even faster. And this access over ownership mentality has huge implications for education as well, because when you think about it, why own information, why memorize something if you have access to it anytime you want? Digital natives don't understand why they have to memorize these formulas and facts and everything, because they can look it up anytime they want. They know it's always available. So why pay for a textbook if you can easily access that information? And speaking of education, with these trends here, one of the defining trends with digital natives is what's happening in education. Let me show you some scary statistics here. I'm sure you're aware of many of these. In less than 30 years, the cost of tuition has gone up over 500%. And now student loan debt cumulatively is at $1.1 trillion in the US. That's more than all of credit card debt combined. And that's tripled just since 2005. So this is a very fast-moving trend. This is not a linear trend. And according to a recent study, there are 250 jobs available, or 250 applications for every 1 corporate job available. So it's really no surprise that that these millennials here are called the boomerang generation, because they leave home, go to college, get a degree, and come right back home again. And I'm sure many of you know a digital native who might have, you might even have one at your house that went and got a degree, came back and boomeranged right back home again. And only about half of millennials that have a degree are employed because they're either unemployed or underemployed. They're doing a job they didn't need a degree for in the first place. So they went to school, got a degree, did what they're supposed to do, and now they're working at a job they didn't even have have a degree for, but they're 4 years behind and really in debt, or they don't have a job at all. So their impacts of their worldview should not be underestimated because a lot of ourselves or our coworkers or our students are digital natives, so we have to understand how they think. So what are some things you can do as an educator to adapt to these digital native trends? Well, I think one thing that really helps is just to take the perspective of a younger student. Identify different areas you need to unlearn by looking at the world the way they look at the world. So imagine that you're a digital native entering college. So you have a professor up there talking for an hour in every class. You're used to watching 6-minute videos on YouTube, but you have someone just standing there talking to you. You're forced to buy a bunch of paper textbooks for like $200, and you have to buy the new version because the publisher decided to move a picture that was on page 84 to page 85, and they flipped the chapter around, and now you have to buy it again. You're not allowed to use your phone or your tablet or anything on a test because, even though you use your phone for everything else to find out answers, you can't use it on a test. So you're waiting a week to find out your grades on something, which is like an eternity when you're used to like constant feedback of always finding out, but now you have to wait a week to find out if you pass this test when you love constant feedback. So this classroom is becoming increasingly disconnected from the world of digital natives. So think, if you were an 18-year-old student, what would you change about your class? Try to just pretend like you walked in your class as an 18-year-old student. What would you change about it? I'm not saying that an 18-year-old student has all the answers of what you should do in your class, but I mean, it's helpful to kind of think what they would like to do and then go from there. Now, if you're an educator, how about using tools like Google Apps for Education? Google just announced this unlimited 21st century backpack for schools and for education. You can store all of your information online for your classes. It organizes things automatically for you, and it's just free for educators. So that's tools like that they can use. And remember this access over ownership mentality when you're assigning them these expensive textbooks or other things they have to buy. And also remember their economic reality when you're assigning these things to them. And whenever possible, you should engage students by giving them many choices, allowing them to have the flexibility to work with you. And a good example of that is having them collaborate with you on your syllabus. And Benita Budd, actually is doing that right now, and she's having some really good results with that. So it does work. It's good to experiment with these different things. Now, another thing that digital natives are impacting is the world of work. By 2020, 50% of the workforce will be digital natives. And it's projected by 2025, just 5 years later, it'll be 75% of the workforce will be digital natives. So this convergence of these generational trends and rapidly advancing technology is really changing the world of work. And I think it's important as educators to be honest with ourselves and say, why do students go to college? You might have an expensive 4-year or something where people are trying to find themselves and get a French literature degree or something like that, but the vast majority of students are going to school to get a better job, to improve their lives. They're going to school to get a good career. So changes in the workforce can certainly impact their decisions that they make for education, influence the decisions for education. So how it's changing, or how are things changing? What's changing? Well, first of all, you have this BYOD policy at a lot of workforces. Bring your own device. So what happens is if you're having to bring your phone and use it for work, but you're at home and you still get an email, it's starting to blur the lines of when am I at work, when am I not at work. I know as educators you're used to taking work home with you, which I know that happens all the time, but in a lot of other industries, this is really changing how things are done when people have to bring their work home with them and they're always connected. So I think we're at the beginning of the end of 9 to 5 because the lines are becoming so blurred. Then you have huge things with the fluctuation in the economy. It's really expensive to hire people and fire people as the economy goes up and down. So there's an explosion of freelancing and project-based employment. So you have companies like Odesk and Elance, which have actually just merged, which connect companies with freelancers just to do certain projects. And if it works well, you pay them and that's good. Or if it doesn't work, you don't have to worry about trying to fire them and worry about the disability and everything. And they're connecting millions of companies with people all the time. This freelancing is just exploding. When you look at it, millennials, with their different viewpoint, when they start a job, they're already thinking about their next job. This job is actually just a bridge to their next job. They're not thinking, I'm going to work here the rest of my life and I'm going to get a pension and retire and everything like this. They're like, how can this job help me get to this next job? So we're witnessing this dramatic decrease in career life expectancy. For digital natives, they want to do something that they really value and that they think is worth their time and it's going to help them get to their next goals. So even if they don't have another job lined up for themselves, they will just quit. They'd probably just rather go back and live with their parents than do a job that they hate. And that has major impacts on the workforce. I think a major trend that the world in education is not talking about is what's happening with automation in the workforce. So for years, our production in the US has been going up, but the number of people it takes to do it is either staying the same or dropping a little bit. And this has been happening in certain forms for over 100 years now. If you look at food production and agriculture, in the year 1900, we had like 40% of the US population working in agriculture. Now it's less than 2%, but it's not like we have 38% of the country starving or something, because our production's gone up so much. And so automation's already displaced millions of jobs, but when people typically think of automation, they think of like a 1970s factory robot that's bolting doors on cars, and if you get in its way, it's going to just chop your head off, and it might replace like 1 or 2 workers or something. But that's just the very beginning right now. You have, just for robotics, for example, we have Baxter. This robot here, he can work around humans. He's aware of the surroundings. It's not going to just cut your head off if you're in the wrong place. You don't have to have an engineer program him. It's not like an expensive thing you have to program with an engineer and pay, have someone on staff to do it. If you need to teach Baxter something, you can have a high school student do it. Put him in programming mode and just show Baxter what he's supposed to do. And then Baxter does that until you change it whenever you want. You can get a software upgrade. You just got a software upgrade, I think, a year ago that doubled the amount of work he can do, how fast he can do it, just through software. But the key thing is Baxter's $25,000 for the current version. That starts to get pretty compelling for businesses to kind of be like, I don't have to give him a lunch break. He doesn't ever get sick. I don't have to pay for health insurance. $25,000. But I think what people really aren't talking about is not what's with robotics, but what's happening in software. I think that's where the major driver is for displacement of jobs. Let me give you an example. Here's a little quiz question for you. How many jobs do you think are displaced from consumer level, like being able to have GPS on your phone or in your car? You don't need an exact number. Just think about it a little bit. So you're probably thinking, well, I suppose if you're making atlases and you publish them, Rand McNally might not be doing so well. But people who make software for the GPS units will now have new jobs, and the people have to make them, so it kind of evens out. Does that seem probably about basically evens out? Let me help you think like a futurist on this one. Here's how I see it. Let's say there's probably about 200 million drivers in the US right now, 200 million US drivers. Let's say every day, GPS displaces about 3 miles of driving. So some days you're just driving to work. You already know how to get here. You're not saving any miles. Some days you're like me when I'm traveling. I probably saved 30 miles in the last 2 days being here using my GPS to get around. So let's just say an average is 3 miles a day. That's 600 million miles every single day that are not being driven in the US alone just because of GPS. Think how much gas is not being purchased to not drive 600 million miles. Think how many repairs are not being made on vehicles because they're driven less miles. How many less repairs on roads? What if you own a restaurant that's on like the old way people used to go, and now GPS just routes them right around it, and now your restaurant's closed? So there's secondary and tertiary effects you really got to be aware of with software. And software is, if you look closely, you can see it's already demolishing huge sectors of jobs. You look at companies like TurboTax, that's transformationally changed the way that CPAs do business. You have like 80% of people do their taxes in TurboTax now. LegalZoom for attorney work. Wall Street, if you go to the trading floor in Wall Street, there is almost no one there. I have a degree in finance, and I'm not in finance because I knew that I had a very short career span in finance because it's high-frequency traders. It's just computers trading with each other. So this is really happening. And I already mentioned Watson, some of the things that we're just seeing the beginning of what Watson can do. There's also algorithms. A venture capital firm just announced that they've elected an algorithm to the board of directors. So this algorithm has the same voting rights as anyone else on the board to, what investments they make, because it's looking at thousands of pages of documents and all the latest financial news. So they have a software sitting on their board. There's algorithms that can be wine critics now. They can sense all the different, it's just incredible what's happening. If you read the sports journal or the sports pages, most sports articles are written by algorithms. Journalism is being transformed by machines. It just takes all the pertinent information, mixes it together, and spits out an article that looks good. So a lot of the sports page is written by a computer. So what happens when you have all these people displaced from their current jobs because of this transformation and automation? You have a lot of people that are going to work for themselves. And I think we're at the beginning of this age of entrepreneurship because there's so many tools now for entrepreneurs. You have 3D printing, and if you're following 3D printing, it is incredible what's happening. And I'm happy to hear Wake Tech now has some 3D printers. So if you go check them out, I would highly recommend it. This body of this car was printed in 44 hours with a 3D printer. I mean, this is just the beginning. The stuff that's happening there is incredible. And you have Amazon Web Services, so if you want to start a business, you don't have to go buy a whole bunch of servers and hope a bunch of people come. You can automatically just scale up based on your demand. And then services like I mentioned, like LegalZoom and Squarespace to design your website. So starting a business today is nothing like it was 5 years ago. What you have to have today is so much less than it was 5 years ago. So as people are getting displaced, they're starting to just start their own businesses. And you have co-working spaces popping up all over the place. This is a great co-working space in Minneapolis called Coco. Basically, a bunch of entrepreneurs just come together and they work in the same space. It's kind of like this guaranteed serendipity of all these people that are all motivated and working all these different projects. They can share their ideas. I work in a co-working space in Tallahassee. It's just fantastic. If I have a question, I can just walk over to a web designer or walk over to an architect or something. And if someone wants to come over to me and say, like, hey, what's happening in genomics right now? They can just come over and talk to me. So it's really good. I know that in this area, there are quite a few co-working spaces. So I'd recommend going and checking some of those out. So will higher education be able to support how fast things are changing in the workforce with all these new advancements and all this automation? And what can we do about it? What are some things we can do here? I think one thing to recognize is that these one-and-done degrees are over. You can't just go get a degree and then live off that information the rest of your lives. We have this continual need for lifelong learning and unlearning and then relearning. And careers are being created and disappearing much faster than our 5-year procurement processes. That's something that's really important, how fast it's changing. And I think as 4-year universities fail to adapt, like I mentioned, and as you know, they're very traditional, I think there'll be a significant decline in students leaving, being transfer students going to a 4-year university. Because if the 4-year university is not teaching what they need to know to get in the workforce, they're not going to transfer. So that's a big decline in transfer students. And employers' attitudes are even changing towards education as well. You know, in Google's official hiring guide, the word college isn't even in there? They don't have the word college in their official hiring guide. Because when you think about it, if you take a coding class for 8 weeks and you're kind of already proficient, you kind of think like that already, you can easily get a job offer for $100,000 easily. I know recruiters, and this is very common. You get a job offer for $100,000 after an 8-week course. If you learn Ruby on Rails or some of these languages, there's a 0% unemployment rate right now. So the employer is not saying, oh, let me see your GPA. They're saying, can you do what you're supposed to be able to do? So you think of the scenario. So what if you're like, let's say you're in your 50s, you lose your job to automation, you have a bunch of experience, you have a lot of skills, but to re-enter the workforce, there's a couple gaps that you have to fill in. It doesn't make sense for you to go back to a 4-year university and start all over again and relearn all the stuff you already know. But you really just need to be able to just fill in the pieces you don't have right now and then be able to move into the workforce again. So what can we do? First of all, I think we need to be very honest about why people go get higher education, and that's primarily to get jobs. And that can kind of reset our thinking. Thinking, why are they here? They're here to get another job. And I think we need to reduce the length of the course procurement process. Find ways to speed that process up. And then anticipate new careers to start proactively creating courses for these careers as they're coming out, but at the same time, anticipate which careers are going away and kind of get away from those. And by staying ahead of the curve, you're going to be ahead of a lot of other people because other universities, they just traditionally are not thinking about it. They're sort of way behind the curve of what courses to create and what courses to get rid of. Of course, you want to increase your partnerships with industry to create just a straight pipeline from you get this degree or you get this information, these credentials, and go straight into a career. Just create this direct pipeline. Have them help you create these courses. And then consider offering new models for students. I'm going to give you a great example of a new model here. This is the University of Wisconsin flexible option. Basically, they don't care how you learned it. If you can pass all their assessments, you can get a degree from University of Wisconsin that's indistinguishable from any other degree. So if you have all this information but you don't have the degree, you can go take these tests and these assessments, and it's fully recognized, and the cost is so much less. So you can kind of have like the all-you-can-eat option for 3 months for $2,250. You can take as many tests as you want in 3 months. And you can continue doing it on your own pace. Every 3 months it's $2,250. So you could take care of a huge amount of education expense just by taking these courses. Okay, well, I want to talk about a few specific trends in education technology. Now, I think there's 3 major trends in education technology that we need to pay attention to, and not just how they're emerging, but how they're converging as well. That's online, adaptive, and mobile. Those are 3 keywords: online, adaptive, and mobile. So let's look at the hard trends here. With online, we have like 2.5 billion people right now, roughly, connected to the internet. That's probably going to double to 5 billion or more by the end of this decade. So in 6 years, we're going to have double the number of people connected to the internet. Then you look at online learning platforms. You have all this new stuff with AI, like Watson, that are creating these new adaptive learning platforms. So that's the adaptive piece. Then you have explosive growth in mobile devices. So you have 1 billion smartphones being shipped just last year. So you have these three things coming together. So let's start with the online education trend. Does everyone remember back in 2012 when MOOCs were the next big thing and MOOCs were going to totally disrupt education and it was going to change the world? 160,000 students showed up for this class online. It was incredible. I was fully convinced about MOOCs when I took this class. And then you had the big three that came after that, Udacity, which Run created, and then edX, MIT, and Harvard, Coursera. I think Coursera is up to 9 million students now, so it's still going strong. But these are totally supposed to disrupt education. There are all these different variations like the Minerva Project and different kinds of MOOCs that were coming out. But then many educators, they called it a hype cycle. They said it was a fad. They said, we've seen this before, that education is supposed to get disrupted. And did you know that around the turn of the century, the 19th century, professors were just freaking out because students all of a sudden had access to their textbooks that they didn't have before? Because what professors were doing is they were standing up in front of the class and reading their textbooks to the students. So you'd have to sit there and just listen to them read their textbooks for an hour. All of a sudden, the textbooks became available and affordable to students, and they were terrified that their jobs were going to go away because the students would just sit there and read their own textbooks. They're like, well, why do I need to be here? They can just read it themselves. But the more forward-looking professors stopped just standing up and reading their textbooks. They helped them use that information and apply that knowledge to the text instead of just reading it to them. And since that's happened, we've had everything that's supposed to disrupt education. When you could get books in the mail, I said, okay, education's going to go away. People just get books in the mail. And then TV, people will just watch classes on TV. And then the VCR, people just get a tape of a class and watch that. So if you look at history, we've heard this before many, many times. And there were certainly problems with education, or with MOOCs in the beginning, because you had a very low completion rate, maybe 5 to 10% of classes would be completed. People who were taking the classes were typically already had at least a bachelor's degree. So you had educated people just kind of experimenting, trying out new things. Sometimes the educators did not have the equipment and the facilities available to create really quality content online. So you had a lot of bad MOOCs that come out. But the number one question is motivation. What will motivate people to do this self-paced learning and do everything on their own without a teacher or a professor saying, you have to have this turned in by Wednesday? So that was a huge problem. So there were certainly problems with that. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. That's just the online piece in MOOC 1.0. Then you have adaptive learning platforms. And a great example of adaptive learning platforms is Newton. Who's familiar with Newton? I think this is one of the biggest potentials for education right here, what's happening in adaptive learning. Adaptive learning uses big data and algorithms to figure out what students are learning. So you're logged into the platform. It's like an individualized learning platform that's constantly updating based on what you're learning and not learning. And you don't move on until you know the concept. So it's mastery learning. You can't get a 70% and pass. You have to master this concept to move on to the next one. It's especially useful in math right now. Arizona State University, UNLV, University of Alabama, a lot of big schools are using this. Pearson, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt signed up for it. Microsoft just signed a big deal with them to integrate this in their education software. So this adaptive learning platform, like this individualized learning, is now becoming available because of technology. And the last piece of this puzzle is the mobile internet. So 60% of digital natives think that in 5 years, everything will be done through mobile devices online. 60%. They don't even see a need for a desktop or a laptop or even a tablet. So why can't education be a mobile-first experience as well, if everything's shifting that way? You look at 10 years ago, 0% of people had a smartphone. Now we have the majority of Americans have a smartphone. So we're interacting with these things all the time. In fact, the average American checks their smartphone over 150 times a day. That's motivation right there. Why are they checking their phone 150 times a day? And if you look at digital natives, it's probably like 3,000 or something. I don't know the exact numbers on that one. But. So you have things like iTunes U. iTunes U just announced that they're allowing you to fully create, run, and do everything for a course using your iPad. You don't have to have a computer at all. You can create the whole thing. You can interact with the students just on your iPad. Samsung's doing the same thing with some of their devices. And I think that using these mobile platforms and adaptive learning, I think that some of the best courses, even at the college level, are going to start looking a lot more like a game than just like a traditional course. And this is just MOOC 1.0. So if the MOOCs and the online learning today with these things together are like a brick phone, what does a smartphone version look like? People can just dismiss MOOCs and say, oh, these aren't all these things that I named, that's wrong with them. This is just version 1.0. If you looked at a brick phone, you wouldn't say, yeah, I'm going to be ordering a cab from this in 5 years or something. So how do the convergence and emergence of these trends come together to address some of these concerns? You look at motivation. One of the tragedies of the last 10 years is some of the smartest minds in the world have all been working very diligently to figure out how to get you to click on banner ads. Some of the smartest computer scientists are working on how to get you to click on banner ads. What if we apply just a little bit of that information, those techniques to education to motivate people, to find out what makes them tick, what drives them, how to get them to re-engage? And you have accessibility. Now we have this huge global audience. So before, if you're speaking to these little local groups, now we have a global audience that can access these platforms. And I think the big thing is this, with these platforms, you have rapid iteration, fast changing. So let's say you're teaching 50 students. You might have to teach them like 6 semesters before you can get some really solid, valuable feedback on what needs to change and how to improve it. If you have 160,000 students and everything's divided up into individual 3-minute concepts or something, you can fairly quickly see, wow, 4% of people pass this one and 98% pass this one. I think I need to iterate and change a few things like in almost real time. And that's a huge driver. And as MOOCs continue to improve, we need to consider how this is going to change the way your job looks. Could your role begin to change with these new online learning platforms the way that the roles changed for the professors in the 1900s, where they weren't reading their text anymore to their class? So what can we do to take advantage of these new options in online learning technology? Well, we know they're just going to continue to improve. We're going to get version 1.0, version 3.0, just going to keep going and going and going. So like in any traditional industry, you can choose to fight it and try to keep things the same, or you can choose to find opportunities and ways to adapt to it and evolve with it. How many here have taken a MOOC outside of Wake? Okay. That's a good percentage of you, but I would highly recommend just take a MOOC. Go on Coursera, go on Udacity, go on any of these different platforms. See what you don't like, see what you do like. Think of it as a digital native. Think, how is this engaging? What could they change? Where could they make this different? And of course, continue to experiment with blended learning. I know you guys are already doing a lot of that, but this flipping the classroom idea where you have students learn the information, maybe from someone, if it's technology or something, maybe from someone who actually created the technology themselves. They take their MOOC of that person, they come back into class, and you act as a facilitator to help them discuss these ideas and apply these different concepts in the classroom and do their homework in the classroom, but learn the information outside. And I think we really need to recognize this shift to mobile education and really think about designing courses for mobile. That is a hard trend. We are absolutely moving to a mobile-first internet. But very few courses are being actually applied to use specifically and first on mobile, and possibly only on mobile. And of course, be willing to experiment with adaptive learning platforms. I would highly recommend someone, or as many of you as possible, check out Newton and even think of how you can use that and just see what else is going on there. Because these adaptive learning platforms are incredible. And the results you're getting, the results speak for themselves. Look what's happening at ASU, look what's happening at UNLV. Their percentages of, their need for remedial courses and stuff are dropping dramatically because this mastery learning, these people are learning and not moving on until they know the concept. So just check out those adaptive learning platforms. All right, now for some pretty crazy stuff here. We're going to talk about emerging technology to be aware of. So like I mentioned, these aren't things that are necessarily directly impacting education right now, but I see tremendous potential for these to have significant impact on education, and that's why I'm going to talk about them today. Here's the first one. Oculus Rift. This is mind-blowing. As a futurist, I think Oculus Rift in the next couple of years will be literally bigger than smartphones. And I'm not saying that, I'm not using hyperbole at all. I literally think that. Virtual reality, this is a virtual reality device. It's been terrible for the last 20 years. I mean, you had the Game Boy that was making people throw up, the little thing they put on, and there's like a digital native, like a 19-year-old kid named Palmer Luckey. He had an app, so he made an app, so he had a lot of money, so he's like, I want to make something with virtual reality because it doesn't exist today. He started playing around. He made this virtual reality thing. So the thing with virtual reality is like when you turn your head, it moves with you. It convinces your brain that you are where you are. So if you move like this, everything moves exactly to make you think you are in this virtual world, and 3D sound and everything. He made a prototype. This isn't him, this is just someone testing a prototype. His first prototype was first one that was released, won the Consumer Electronics Show in 2013. There's over 10,000 different things, all the biggest companies in the world competing. His prototype of a 19-year-old kid won the Consumer Electronics Show in 2013. His second prototype won the Consumer Electronics Show in 2014. That is incredible to think 2 prototypes won back-to-back at probably the biggest electronics show in the world. And now their new one, Crescent Bay just was announced. So think about what this means for education. If you literally feel like you're in this environment, what about history? You can live history. Learn about the Civil War. How about take place in a battle in the Civil War, and you're thinking you're fighting in the Civil War or World War II? Or what about if you want to learn different math concepts and you can manipulate different shapes and objects and combine things and everything in this virtual environment? I have a friend that develops experiences. They don't call them games. They call them experiences for Oculus Rift. He doesn't work directly for him, but he's one of the developers. I have tried Oculus Rift. It is mind-blowing. I cannot understate that enough. I was trying out, I hate roller coasters. He's like, why don't you try out this roller coaster experience? I put the virtual reality on the Oculus Rift, and it was on the roller coaster. I almost ripped the cord out of the computer. I almost jumped out of my chair, because it's so, you're looking over and you can see 300 feet below you. It was terrifying. And I was in the first prototype. I can't even imagine what the new one's like. But yeah, just Google Oculus Rift, and it's like a never-ending stream of every tech person saying this is the next biggest thing, and this is insane. So if you have an option, just even look online and see if anybody has one of these. And I would highly recommend Wake actually buy a couple prototypes. They're like $350. I mean, this is not super expensive. And Sony is even creating one called the Project Morpheus for the PS4. And Samsung just announced the Gear VR, which you can take a Note 4, clip it in this thing, and also you have a mobile virtual reality experience. That's only slightly less slightly less advanced than the plugged-in version. This is so big that Facebook, which is always trying to stay ahead of the curve because they understand their demographics are shifting, Facebook purchased Oculus Rift for $2 billion earlier this year. They paid $2 billion for a startup with a bunch of prototypes. And they're letting them do exactly, they're completely taking a hands-off approach and letting them do exactly what they want to do. They just gave them the money and said, you make this happen. We're going to sell these at cost and get them out to the whole world. Because you think for Facebook, all of a sudden, your communications now, you could be walking around with your friends, let's go to London today. Okay, now your friends put your VR on and you're walking around wherever. I mean, it's really transformational. I think for education, it's going to be huge. So maybe even look at developing courses on VR. The second one to talk about is augmented reality. You guys familiar with Google Glass? Does anybody have Google Glass here? There are a couple different versions now. Sony's got one. There's one called Meta. Basically, you have a camera and a screen, so you're augmenting. You're not being transported somewhere else, but you're augmenting what you're seeing. Different examples are let's say you're walking down, you're traveling somewhere, and you look at a building. You can quickly scan the building and it'll tell you all information about it. Or if you're having a problem, maybe you could if you're working on math, you could look down at the formula. It'll scan the formula. You can have it superimpose what you're supposed to do on it, or kind of go step by step what you're supposed to do on your screen. Another thing that's happening is a developer actually found a way to link this with LinkedIn. So if you're at a networking conference, you can walk up to someone, it scans their face, gets facial recognition, pulls their LinkedIn profile, and kicks back all the pertinent information, even the last time you talked to them and everything. So if you're walking up and oh, who's that person? I recognize him. It'll scan them, facial recognition, LinkedIn profile. Oh, that's so-and-so from Wake, or I met them last, and then you can. This is just the beginning, and this has tremendous implications for education. I think it's pretty exciting. It's also kind of terrifying, but I think it's pretty exciting. And then you have cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Stellar, Ethereum. It's this online digital currency that is not tied to the Fed or any individual government. It's pretty amazing. I've actually tried to mess around a little bit. I bought Bitcoin and traded it for Stellar and done some different things. But this is like a 2-week-long seminar on cryptocurrencies. But very briefly, what this can do for education, if you're starting to look at a global audience, which I sincerely think is the way to go instead of focusing locally, looking at a global audience, what if you have a bunch of students in China and they don't take your courses? It's very difficult now to have a student in a different country take your courses and for them to pay you because you have to worry about transfers and wiring it and all the transaction costs, and it's very difficult. And what if you want to make it be really affordable? What if you want your course to be 10 cents and have it be in India or something, and they can take it for 10 cents, but you have 3 million people taking it? With cryptocurrency, it doesn't matter about these different governments and different currencies. They can just instantly transfer you the money via cryptocurrency, and you can charge fractional amounts of money with no transaction costs. So it opens up a whole new market of ways to monetize your information. And MIT has already started taking Bitcoin. This is real. This is really happening. I mean, they've already said you can pay us in Bitcoin for your education. How about AI instructors? Have you guys ever seen this? The guy falls in love with his computer program, with his operating system? Yeah. Now, I love this movie because as a futurist, I cannot tell you how frustrating it is watching movies about the future as a futurist. I even started doing futurist reviews on my old website. I'd review movies about what was wrong. I'm thinking, why are there fluorescent light bulbs in the year 2075? I mean, come on, people. Why did they hire a futurist to actually say, you know what, this makes no sense at all. Why are they driving a 2005 Ford in the year 2050? I think, just as an aside here, I think the worst futurist movie ever made is Looper. I was going to do a futurist review of Looper. I got 8 minutes and I said, nope. This would be like a 40-page document if I tried to write a review, and that's so incredibly wrong. But Her is a good example of this AI, artificial intelligence, things like Watson Advisor. Now IBM's using Watson to make an advisor for research. So you have, like, in addition to adaptive learning, you have like an artificial intelligence program that's actually helping you, guide you individually and helping you learn, being like a tutor on your shoulder all the time, always with you. And the last thing is brain interaction and brain interfaces, which sounds extremely futuristic. So this is the Muse. This is $299. There are there are no needles or anything. It's not being drilled into your brain. You wear it like a headband, and you can visualize your brain waves. So you can, different brain waves and different frequencies, like your betas and your alphas and everything, help you with focus and all kinds of different things. You can train your brain. So you can look at this. It's scanning your brain. And you can actually visualize, there's different things like you see a beach and then the waves it's like a storm, the waves come in and stuff if you get more nervous or more unfocused. And then as you get more focused and birds start landing and it gets really peaceful. So you can really visualize. Once you can visualize, you can start training your brain to be able to stay in a focus zone and reduce anxiety and all these different things. And this is just the very beginning. But one step past this is the ability to transfer and implant memories. Now that sounds really futuristic, but so did self-driving cars. And Google's done 700,000 miles driving around all over California. So there is a possibility here. And I'll give you an example that just happened fairly recently. Researchers actually close by here at Duke were actually wiring rats' brains. They had physical wires connected to rats' brains, and they were testing transferring memories from one rat to the other rat. They actually got it down to a point where they had a research lab in Brazil train a rat how to do a specific task, and then transfer the memory to a rat in a lab at Duke, and then the rat instantly knew how to do the task and got the reward. And it had never seen that task before in its life. And they had a very high success rate, even transferring the information that far. So what happens if you can just implant memories? You now know Spanish. You now are an engineer. I mean, that sounds pretty crazy, but a lot of these things I'm talking about sound pretty crazy, and they've already happened. It kind of reminds me of in The Matrix. You guys seen The Matrix like a long time ago? He's like, whoa, I know Kung Fu. I mean, that'd be crazy. What if that's how you learn things? Just gets transferred right to you. So what are the actions here? I kind of mentioned some different things throughout with each individual section, but what are some of the things you can do here? How can you help create the future of education? Well, first of all, you have to understand the importance of unlearning. That's so critical, because if you don't move this old stuff out of the way, you don't make room for the new stuff to come in. Frame things with a hard trends perspective. There's so much uncertainty, but if you know things that are definitely happening, you can start looking at the soft trends, things that might happen. And there's so much we have no control over at all. But just by recognizing these trends and being willing to adapt and evolve, we put ourselves in a really good position in the future to be dynamic and make the changes as needed. And of course, we need to make these decisions to embrace change and to make a culture that embraces change. And the problem is when you talk about this crazy change and things that are happening in industries, I look around the room and you might have some people that are thinking, well, I'm going to retire pretty soon, so I don't really care about this. This can get totally disrupted, but I'm going to be on a beach somewhere. I really challenge you to not have that attitude. If that's what you're thinking, this actually is a phenomenal opportunity for you to set an example as a leader to people who look up to you and say, listen, this stuff is really happening. Even though it might not impact me directly, this is so important that I want you guys to really start working. Let's start this right now. I think that's very powerful for people who are nearing retirement to have that attitude for the younger generations behind them. So first of all, what can you do institutionally? What can you do at Wake Tech as an institution? This is going to be controversial, I think, but I think the most important thing you can do right now is stop building. Stop building buildings. I think you should instead focus your resources on reaching this global audience, all these new people that are connected, instead of just trying to focus on local on-campus students. Everywhere you go, every university or college I've been to, the number one thing they're doing is just building like crazy. It's like they think that forever we're just going to have continued growth of on-campus students forever and ever, amen. We're going to have on-campus students. They're just going to keep growing and growing and growing. But I think we already are way, way over infrastructure for even the near future. So next time you're building or thinking about a building project, think, are we going to need this in 10 years? Are we going to have enough students to even, is this going to be a ghost town? as we start moving to this global audience away from local students. So before you break ground, think about that. Find ways to automate processes. Make things transparent and as easy as possible for new students. So many things can be automated. Oftentimes in education, we have a process-based view of things. You're more concerned that everything goes through the certain steps and all the bureaucracy than actually what the end results are. So try to automate things. Just make them happen as quickly as possible. And of course, by reducing layers of bureaucracy, we already talked about bureaucracy and how that's viewed. By reducing layers of bureaucracy, you can make the organization more dynamic and able to change. And give educators the resources to create these really compelling online courses with adaptive learning and mobile first. That's going to be a little expensive in the beginning to create these. You might have to get like a studio and these new online learning platforms you might have to buy licenses for, but I think it'll truly pay off as you're moving to this global audience. And question tradition. Tradition is so important in education, and I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, but when you think about if you look at something, why are we doing it this way? Is it because we've always done it that way and it's most comfortable for us? Or is it because this is actually the best way to reach students and to increase education? Now, what can you do individually? As individuals, how can you adapt to this future and help create the future? Well, first of all, I'm talking about all these new tools that are coming out, so just pay attention to all these new tools and start using these new tools like the Google Apps for Education. Try to look at your classroom perspective of digital native. I invite you next time you go into class, walk in your classroom like it's your first day and you're 18 years old. And think of the different things that are going to happen throughout that class and how you'd view that as an 18-year-old or just someone just starting on their education. And I think it's very important to step outside your traditional journals and traditional websites that you might visit and look at different tech news sites, maybe go to entrepreneur meetups, try these new sharing apps. Because sometimes in academics what happens is we surround ourselves with other academics, and I guess I'm not an academic, but we're saying like you surround yourself with other academics, and it kind of becomes like this echo chamber. You have it kind of forces new ideas out because you create this bubble of kind of the same ideas getting passed back and forth. So go to an entrepreneur meetup, go to TechCrunch or some tech website and to see these new things that are coming out. And exploit this free online content. Don't compete with it. If there's a really amazing class in something you're teaching, use that. Say, hey, there's this awesome class. Why don't you take this? We'll flip it. You come into class. We'll talk about all the possibilities here. I can facilitate that. And be ready to experiment with the changing role as an educator. Like I said, the roles are always evolving. So in closing today, I just want to, if you remember anything, just remember the world is changing exponentially. We cannot think linearly. We cannot afford to have a wait-and-see attitude anymore. Then so many opportunities are being created by these advancements if we're looking for them. If we're not trying to keep things the same and we're looking for these advancements, so many opportunities are being created. And recognizing these trends and being willing to take action, this will let you create the future in education. Thank you.